Welcome today to everyone to the single most important requirement for managerial success. It's a webinar put on by effective managers, and I am just delighted to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to working with you today in going through this content. I'm the president and founder of Effective Managers. I have 40 plus years of manager, executive experience. I've run my own company. The last 15 years I've been in management consulting, and now I'm focusing in on a very narrow segment, which is looking at manager effectiveness. So how can we help managers and organizations to be as effective as possible? And you'll see why I'm so passionate about this as we work through the content in this webinar. So today I want to start with managerial success and to think about how do we get there. So how do we as managers ensure that those managers who are reporting to us can be successful in the work that they're doing? How can we ensure that their teams are successful so that we as managers are able to be as effective as possible in the work that we want to do? And the starting point I'd like today is to think about strategies. And I've read many places, many times about 70% of strategies failing to achieve the desired results. To me, that's just amazing. In my experience, most organizations are pretty good about putting in place the strategic plan, but where they're not very good is executing that strategy, actually achieving those things that they intended to achieve when they put the strategy in place. And the reason that they're not able to achieve the strategy is something that I call organizational churn. This isn't the churn like positions turning over, which is a type of churn. I'm thinking more about the churn in organizations that is a lot of activity that just does not get you where you need to go. So there's a lot happening in the organization, but it's not properly focused. It's like wind blowing in different directions across a lake. You got a lot of choppy water, but no waves going in any one particular direction. We'll come back to this when I talk about strategy in a minute. So the question is, why is this happening in organizations? Why are we in situations where so much time and energy is spent on things that aren't directly involved in the implementation of the strategy of the organization? So part of I think what's happening is that when you're in the organization and we're working together on developing this vision for the organization, the strategy that we wish to achieve, very often you see this here I've got the Pegasus, the horse, the beautiful vision of where we want to get to in the future. But when it comes time to the execution and you're 3, 4, 5 years down the road, what you end up with is something that looks a lot more like this. So for whatever reason in the organization, when we're starting off, we've got a direction, we've got a lot of momentum that we're trying to build, and we feel that we've got buy-in from the organization, but for whatever reason, we're not able to get to where we want to go. So this does come back down to the whole aspect of organizational churn, and it's not like organizations aren't working at trying to improve these areas. They run programs for better meetings. They do team building exercises. They run communication programs. I've got the list here. I won't read it to you. So what we need to then think about is that if we're trying to improve managerial performance in our organizations, and we're trying to coach people to do better jobs, and we're trying to lead people in a way that's going to help them be more effective, and we're not being successful, then there's something more fundamentally at odds with our approach in terms of performance management. So what I'm going to talk to you today is a little bit about the situation today as I've seen it and some of the research that we've done on that. I'll then move on to the starting point of this webinar, which is the single most important requirement for managerial success and why I feel that way. And then we'll come back around to some of the more fundamental causes and systems, and then we'll be closing. So the content kind of falls down into those 3 areas for the day today. So the situation of managers today in my career as a manager and in different executive and leadership positions in organizations, and then as a management consultant, I've literally talked to thousands of managers. And in talking to managers, there's this common thread in terms of them feeling that in terms of the time that they have available and the resources that they have available, that there's just more to do than they're able to accomplish. And then to make that worse, the priorities that they have set for them are not clear. So if you've got more than you can do on your to-do list, and the priorities about what is most important aren't clear, then that puts you in a no-win situation as a manager, because you're just not able to focus in on that work which your manager is going to feel is the most important for you in terms of what you need to deliver. So what we did is partner with the University of Ottawa to try to understand this, because no matter how much we spend time and effort as management consultants in change programs and supporting new systems, at the end of the day, managers still seem to be caught in this conundrum of how do I focus in on the most important work for the organization. And what we found coming out of that research is that managers only spend 55% of their time doing value-added work. So that's almost half of their time is doing work that they don't perceive as value added to the position. And value added work is work that only the individual in the position with their skills and capability is able to accomplish. So if managers are spending almost half of their time on stuff that they don't believe is important, then things are going to suffer in the organization. Now, I don't have time. I could talk about the research with you all day. I don't have time to do that. So what I would like to do is offer to you, we have available for sale on our website a white paper called Are Your Managers Effective? And in that we go through the results of the research, the findings, the key factors that are there, and a generic strategy for improving things. So I'm offering that free to all webinar participants. And if you're listening to this as a recording, I'll offer it to you free as well. Just send me an email, and I've got my contact information at the end of the webinar. Ask for this, and I'd be happy to send that along to you. So then if managers aren't able to focus in on their value-added work, which is, as I defined to you earlier, what is it that's suffering? So here's a premise that I have for you. There are three types of work that managers have to do. The first is what I call their day job. It's their job description work. The work that they need to do day to day, week to week, month to month in terms of achieving the purpose of their role and the continuous improvement with respect to that. The second big bucket of work are on projects or change initiatives, and those things that are specifically delegated by that manager's manager. You might be leading a project team, you might be sitting on a project team, you might be doing some research into a new product, whatever it might be. So those tend to be time bound. And then the third one, and believe me, this one often doesn't even make the list. The third one is their managerial leadership accountabilities. So if I'm in a manager of a position and I'm in a leadership position because I have a team that I'm accountable for, I need to manage that team. But if I'm in a position where I'm spending 45% of my time on stuff that isn't value added, something has to suffer. And in my experience, it tends to be that third one, because the day-to-day work is urgent and demanding. It has to get done. The project or change initiatives are time bound, so they've got timelines, do this by then to this level of quality. So they tend to get the attention. But the managerial leadership is something that can be put off until tomorrow. It's understood as being important, but if I'm going to have this performance management meeting today, or I'm going to meet this urgent deadline, which is what's going to happen, I'm going to say to my subordinate manager, let's meet tomorrow or the next day or next week, and that kind of work can continue to be put off. So the question then is, how do we as managers really focus in on those things that are important in the organization? What is the strategy of the organization? How do we execute against that strategy so that we are going to be successful in our role and in doing the work that needs to be done with respect to our direct reports? So it becomes a question then of balance, and how do we get the balance in between all of those three areas of work? So I would define then the single most important requirement for managerial success as being ensuring that your team is operating effectively and cohesively, because it's your ability as a manager to deliver results against your plan that are going to help your manager meet his or her plan, that on the chain all the way up to the CEO are going to help the CEO meet the strategy that are going to assure your success. So your success therefore depends on each member of your team being successful, but also on your team as a whole being successful. And the only way I know how you're going to be successful doing that is to ensure that you are doing that managerial leadership work that needs to be done as a manager, taking the time, making the time to sit down with employees, in your case, subordinate managers, to set context for them for their work, to ensure that they understand your plan, that they understand their impact on your plan, their impact on the strategy, and so on. Again, there's a lot more I could say on that, but I want to keep on the target for the content for today's webinar. So this does matter, and it matters in this way, and there's a lot of corroborating research in this area. So two of my favorite ones. This one's from Lee Branham. He wrote a book, The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave, and his finding was that 70% of employees leave a job for reasons related to factors that are directly controllable by their managers. And then this one from Gallup, I really love the Gallup information and the way that they're mining information, is that work groups ineffectively managed are less productive and less profitable. So this shows over and over again in research why managerial leadership is the most important aspect of ensuring that people are successful in organizations. Here's another one. This is a really fundamental one, and I would bet dollars to donuts that each and every one of you have heard of this. It's called the service profit chain. It was published first by James Heskin back in 1994 in Harvard Business Review. Heskin is a professor at Harvard, and he put forward this premise that if you have more satisfied employees in organizations, that will lead to more satisfied customers, and that will lead to increased revenue and better profit. In other words, the lifetime value of the customer will increase over time. And that's been taken as gospel, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of studies and research projects that have validated that since then. So there's absolutely no question that those relationships exist. However, I'm here to tell you today that there's a really important component of this that tends to have been lost over the time since this was first published. If you go back to Heskin's original paper in 1994, he makes it very clear that underpinning this service profit chain is managerial leadership. So employee satisfaction doesn't just happen. You can't buy it by increasing salaries or by putting in a foosball machine in the cafeteria. The only way that you're going to create the kind of employee satisfaction that you need in organizations is ensuring that you have the managerial leadership in place to ensure that employees are productive, they're engaged, they're doing the work that needs to be done, they're getting the right kind of feedback, and they're feeling satisfied in terms of their relationship with their manager. So this third component of managerial leadership, which I talked about as one of the 3 components of every manager's job, if that's being ignored, it can have very serious negative impact on the organization overall. I won't get into charts too much with you today, but I wanted to make one more point on the next 3 slides before we start getting into the next section. And this point has to deal with that concept of value-added work. Remember the 3 components: my day job, projects, and managerial leadership. So if I'm the CEO of the organization, I'm accountable for delivering results, and those results tend to be measured by the board of the organization in terms of achievement of the strategic plan over years, usually 5 to 10 years, and there'll be milestones that I have to meet as I go forward. So if I'm the CEO, I need to identify that work which I alone have the capability to do, and for which I will be accountable to the board for producing the results. So that's my value-added work. My next job then as the CEO is to figure out, of all of that work that I'm accountable for then, what do I delegate to the next level down, in this case to the vice presidents, so that in in concert, all of the vice presidents working together will achieve results that will provide success within their own departments, but overall will lead to my success in enabling me to do my value-added work so that as a group we are going to be able to deliver on the strategy of the organization. So this comes back to the concept that I'm saying, if the CEO is going to be successful, the CEO needs to manage the executive management team so that each of them are successful, so that altogether the group is successful. Then as the VP, as the vice president, I need to do exactly the same thought process. Now, I know, having had a number of discussions with the CEO, I know exactly what I'm accountable for delivering. What is my value added work? What is that aspect of that work which I must do? And what aspects of it can I delegate down to the director level? And this flows down to the front line of the organization so that you've got a very clear view from each individual in the organization through their manager, through their manager's manager, and all the way back through the CEO to the strategic plan of the organization in terms of what they're accountable for and what their value-added work. One of the key tools that we have for doing this is what I call context and boundaries. So part of my work of delegation is not only to say, do this by then, it's also to set the context for the work in terms of things like position descriptions, things like plans and operating procedures and goals and so on, so that people understand their work. It's not a you must do this in a command and control way, but it's setting an environment within which people are very clear about those things that they need to do and can just get on and do the work. So spend a bit more time on that slide, but I think it's a really important fundamental concept because it leads to this one, is that if you don't have the framework as I described it in place, then you're likely to have drift in the organization. So when we start at the top with the CEO, the CEO's vision of the output that the CEO is accountable for will lead to the strategic plan. But if that work, that managerial leadership work doesn't take place, then over time, just because, not because people don't want to do good work, but because they're making decisions in isolation of that really clear context, there's drift sets into the organization so that over time you end up with the less than ideal results that you had envisioned in your strategic plan. So the goal then is to have the framework in place and align people through a managerial leadership within an accountability framework so that everybody does take initiatives, does make decisions that are absolutely, completely consistent with the strategy. And that's the heart of managerial leadership work. So that brings me to the next area of content then in terms of our webinar today. And the question then is what typically can go wrong in organizations? And those of you that read the promo for this webinar heard the point I was making, that it's often not around competence. So your top performers and your less than top performers, or your not so good performers, are not necessarily not performing because of issues to do with their own competence, but there are other factors at play. So what I want to do in the next few slides is talk a little bit about top performers and those that are not so top, and then lead into what the key issues are that you need to think about over and above competence. So whether or not somebody is successful, of course, does have something to do with whether or not they're able to do the work, and you may actually have poor performers that just aren't able to do that work. But there are other more substantive reasons that need to be in place, and if we treat all of these people the same, you'll be bound to repeat your initiatives to try to improve performance without success. So when I think about top performers, this is the list that I come up with, and you can scan down that. The key aspect to it, and I've experienced this in my own job as a manager of managers. These are the individuals that just really get it. You know, they know their work. They know what they need to do to ensure that their department is running smoothly, and they know what they need to do to support you in your work. And as I have one of the bullets here, as a relatively new manager, many moons ago now, but as a relatively new manager, when this is done right, your subordinates are coming to you with solutions to problems that you didn't even know that you had, because they're really engaged and they're figuring out how to do things in a better way. So that is all good news. These tend to be the people that we draw on for all manner of things in terms of project work, because you just know that they're going to be successful. On the other end of the scale, and up to and somewhere in the middle as well, you get individuals who are not your top performers. And this is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So these are the people that just don't seem to get it, use that term. Um, when you delegate something, you'd expect that they'd be able to go away and get on with the work in the same way your top performers can, but they come back, they need more elaboration, they need more discussion, they need more context. You feel like you're being pulled down into a myriad of details that you really don't want to have to deal with. They come back to you with problems they run into that you would have expected they would be able to solve. So overall, they're just not delivering in the way that you would expect them to deliver. So the commonality of these symptoms is that from the manager's perspective, you tend to see those as competency-based problems. So what you do is you try to provide them with training. You send them away on training programs. You try to provide them with more and better information. You try to coach them in ways that will encourage them to do better. You ask them to do things like come to me with solutions, not with problems, and so on. But what will happen over time is that you will start to delegate more and more narrowly and start to set context more and more narrowly until you find that point where they're going to be able to deliver. So they will be producing much less than your top performers, but they will be able to at least perform at the level that you are now delegating to them. So the downside of that, of course, is that you're reducing the productivity of your department, because imagine what you'd be able to accomplish if all of your team were producing at the same level as your top performers. It would be just amazing results. But in fact, it's much less than that. And if you look at the research in terms of employee engagement, you'll actually find that out of a typical team of 10, you're lucky if 3 of your 10 are the top performers, 3 are probably on the other end, and the rest are somewhere in the middle. So as a manager, you've got a real challenge to deliver what you need to deliver, because this is what you're measured for your success on, and feel like you're kind of dragging at least half of your team along with you. So this brings me then to the next area is to understand what might be happening. So if these people want to do well, and in my experience, most people in organizations do want to do well. So if they want to do well, but they're not being successful in the way that you would expect them to be, what's happening? And there are 2 issues here that you need to be aware of as a manager in an organization. One is around the whole aspect of complexity of work, which has to do with organization design. And the second one has to do with human capability, which has to do with talent management systems. So what I'd like to do is talk about each one of these briefly, and then I'll give you an overview briefly, and then we'll do a bit of a deep dive, particularly into the human capability issue. So the first aspect around organization design, and this is not within the authority of most managers to handle, this is really a CEO accountability, is to ensure that for the organization you have the right number of layers and you have the right alignment of functions for the complexity of work in the organization. And what I mean by complexity of work, I'd like to give you some examples, because this one is really important to understanding the concepts. So I've drawn here a typical hierarchy in an organization. So we start with a worker, then a manager, then a director, and then a vice president. So the CEO is accountable for the whole organization. Now, if you're a worker, if you're a frontline worker, think about the work in the organization. A frontline worker will come in the morning, is assigned their work. There will typically be a procedure to do the work. So do this, then do this, then do this. There will be procedures for solving problems within the work. And there will be instructions that if work goes outside of the procedure and the individual doesn't know what the next step should be, that they will come to the frontline manager to get advice and support in terms of what they need to do next. So for doing work at this level in the organization, it's very much constrained. It can be complex work. Think of the senior customer services relation manager in a bank. It could be a very complex procedure with a lot of ins and outs and choices. But nonetheless, it can be proceduralized if it's not proceduralized as well. And people need to be good in terms of problem solving within that procedure and being able to learn the procedure to be able to follow it and so on. Examples would be of workers would be people at the on an assembly line in a plant. Could be mechanical crews in the transportation industry. They could be customer service representatives in banks. They could be frontline salespeople in financial institutions and so on. The trick is that they come in the morning, they get their work. Usually their work can be done within the day. This is the only job, by the way, where it's the manager's job to figure out what is the appropriate amount of work for you to do during the day. From level 2 work, once you're a frontline manager on up, there's always more work that you can do in a day, and you need to figure out what's the most important and to do that, hopefully within the context of your own manager. So that's frontline work. It's very, very bound. There's a finite number of decisions that can be made in terms of actually making decisions and doing that work. Now, when you move up to what I call level 2 work, this can be professional work. So this is things like doctors, lawyers, engineering work, but it's also frontline manager work. And work at this level is up at that next level of complexity in terms of requiring a diagnostic capability to be able to do that work. So the problem-solving capability for that work is quite different for work at the next level down. So if I'm a frontline manager, I would use that problem-solving capability of being able to diagnose things to gather information from a wide variety of sources, usually more sources than I'm able to measure. So I have to even choose the sources for my information, diagnose a solution to a problem that I see, and then put in place a solution to that problem. So the procedures I talked about in level 1, which are critical for success in level 1 work, are created at level 2. So it's at level 2 frontline manager's accountability, or perhaps it's a specialist professional at level 2 that create the procedure, troubleshoot the procedure, solve problems when the procedure goes off the rails, and improve it. The frontline manager also has to use diagnostic capability in order to assess whether or not the workers are working well. So how do I improve not only the work, how do I improve the workers in terms of helping them to be as successful as possible and to solve problems for them. And this, I dived in a little bit deeper. There's a lot of information on my website on this, so feel free to dig in or ask me for a reference if you want to learn more. But this moves all the way up, and the trick is that at each level of the organization, the complexity of work and the problem-solving capability required to do that work are different and need to be aligned. So if I'm the vice president, I might have an accountability for opening up a new territory on, or even expanding the company's reach into a different continent, and I might have 3 to 5 years to do that. So I would really need to put in place a number of serial paths of activities in terms of supply chain, in terms of logistics, in terms of client markets, in terms of production, when and where and how. All of these things would need to happen in parallel and going out 3 to 4 to 5 years into the future. So again, much more complex. So one would never expect someone that's very successful on the front line to be promoted to a vice president position the next day, because they simply wouldn't have the problem solving capability to do that work. We just know that intuitively. But what we learn from complexity of work is that there is a way of measuring complexity of work. There's a way of describing it and defining it. And if we're aware of this and the differences between each level, it can help us understand some of the problems that we perceive as competence problems. So let me leave that thought with you. I want to lay the next one on, and then we can come back to it. So the trick is that in organizations, we have a talent pool review process in place where we can make sure that we're getting the right people with the right capability, with the right skills and knowledge, and the right application into the right positions. So these are the three aspects of ensuring that we get the right people doing the right work. So on the one hand, complexity of work. Work is different in each level of the organization. For success, we need a manager that's exactly one level above us, that can set the right context for us, and that can solve problems for us that we can't solve, and that can provide us the managerial leadership that we need to do our work. Once we get into the job, then we start talking about having the right capability, problem-solving capability, having the right skills and knowledge, and having the right application to do that work. So what I want to do now in the next few slides is just talk what I mean by these three capabilities that are important for individuals in the organization. So the first one, I really gave you a solid introduction to it when I'm talking about complexity of work, because I can't talk about complexity of work without giving you examples about human capability. So because the complexity of work is different at each level of organization and the capability of work is different, it's really important that we align those two. So for successful placement, the candidate's capability needs to be matched to the requirements of the complexity of the role. So for example, what often happens in organizations is that when there's a vacancy for the manager of the team, you will take the most successful, most competent person on the team and promote them to the next level in the organization. So if there's a vacancy in the frontline manager position, you take the most successful frontline worker and promote that one to be the frontline manager. Now we know that person will have a lot of the understanding of the work, but the question is, will they have that next level of problem-solving capability to be able to work at the next level of the organization, that diagnostic capability to be able to develop the procedures, to develop the employees, and so on. And the challenge in doing this, and this is what most organizations don't understand, is that capability cannot be trained. Capability is a maturation process in the same way I'm going to mature to be a certain height. Actually, I've already matured to that height. But as a child is going to mature to a certain height, this is something that happens because of the biological way in which we were created. So it's the same way with problem solving capability. I almost said the term that's used by Elliot, but I can come back to that one in a minute. So problem-solving capability in terms of being able to solve problems and process work in a certain way is a maturation process. And again, I'll leave that there. There's lots more information on the web if you want to get that. So the symptoms of a mismatch of capability then are, if someone's been over promoted, is the Peter principle, which means that people are promoted to their level of incompetence. I gave you the example of frontline worker to frontline manager, but exactly the same thing can happen from a professional to a director position, or from a director to a vice president position. So we always need to be aware in organizations about what the capability of the individual is vis-a-vis what is the complexity of work. If someone's been over promoted, then we may end up in a situation where we feel like we have to micromanage. So in order to be able to give the person the context they need, we have to give them more information than we would like. The averse is also true. If someone's been over promoted, they will tend to be digging down into the weeds more than they should, because their perceived competency is at the level below where they used to be working. So in fact, they'll be spending more time working at their former level. So this is a cost issue for organizations because you're paying someone to be managing at the next level up when in fact they're still doing most of their work at the former level in the organization. You can also have a situation in the other end where someone has more capability to do the work than they've been engaged in. So someone that might have that level 2 problem-solving capability and in fact is working at level 1, they might be underutilized. So there are opposite issues there in terms of undermanaging, too much distance, and a quality issue. So the second of the three capabilities that are really necessary is skills and knowledge. Now there are three tools that we typically use there. One is experience, one is education, and one is competencies. And while these are all a good start, they're really not sufficient to understand whether or not the person's going to have the skills and the knowledge that they need for success in their work. So the method that I've come across, which I'm really impressed with, is published by McDonald, Burke and Stewart in their framework, and I highly recommend this reading. But here we have to differentiate then between technical skills. So what is my knowledge to do the work? What is the knowledge in terms of the training that I have had, and then what are the social processing skills that I need to, for success in this work? So if I'm then being promoted to a manager position from a frontline position, not only do I need to have that problem-solving capability, I also need to have the ability to manage. So, for instance, I gave you the example of managerial leadership being an important part of the job. If I don't have the skills to manage, if I haven't received the knowledge in terms of what managerial leadership is, then I'm not going to be very successful with that work. The good news here is that knowledge gaps can be trained for. So if you have a really good employee, you want to promote them to the next level, you know that they have the problem-solving capability at that next level, but they're missing some skills, you can send them away on a training program to have that put in place so that they can be successful in terms of doing the work that they need to do. So the symptoms of this mismatch of skills and knowledge, I've given you a bit of a list here, and again, it's really then important that you diagnose as the manager of somebody that's not being successful. Is this some of the missing stuff? So in the first case, if they don't have the problem-solving capability, then you're a bit stuck, because how are you going to, you can't wait for them to mature. I'll come back to this in a minute. But if you can identify one of the issues on this list as being something that is a problem, then we are coming down to skills and knowledge, which is an aspect of competence that you could identify training, whether it's on the job training, sending someone out for training, or you yourself giving them more coaching and more on the job training in terms of helping them be successful at their work. Oh, here's another one, and this one is really interesting, and it's not well understood in organizations either, also from the McDonald, Burke and Stewart framework, and we call this one application. So the fundamental part here is, will the person value all aspects of the work sufficiently that they will apply themselves to all aspects of the work? I'll come back again to the promotion of somebody from the front line to being a frontline manager. So someone may apply to move up to the next level of the organization because they want the increased pay, they want the prestige, and the idea of being more senior in the organization appeals to them. But in the case of the frontline worker moving up to the frontline manager, do they really value managerial work? The exact same situation happens for an individual contributor professional to apply for a director level position, so moving from level 2 to level 3. Do they really value this managerial leadership work in terms of having meetings with their subordinates, giving them context, demonstrating leadership, motivating them, coaching them, ensuring that they're appropriately trained, giving them performance feedback, positive and negative as required, and so on? In many cases, you'll find that the person that gets the job just doesn't value that kind of work. They would rather be, in the case of the frontline manager, out on the floor solving problems than in their office having one-on-one meetings with their subordinates. So this application is a really, really important concept and something that needs to be attended to when you're looking at it. The symptoms of a lack of application in the organization. So if it's a frontline manager, it's these kinds of things. They're always on the floor. They're not doing their admin work. They're always late with the performance management. They're good at coaching because they like being down there in that one-on-one stuff, but they don't have development plans for their managers in the way you would expect a manager to. So this applies in a similar way at every level of the organization. I've seen even CEOs that don't value management, and this is so almost the sure thing for not being able to execute properly is a CEO that is much more valuing the external work, which is really important, valuing the networking, which is really important, but not valuing the managerial work in terms of being really clear with their subordinate vice presidents about what needs to happen and what has to happen when. So it does apply across the organization. The good news in this one is that it may also be able to train and coach for these shortcomings. So perhaps that front level worker who has the capability to be a manager doesn't value managing because they don't have the skills. They have never been taught what it means to be a manager. So by giving them that training and giving them the confidence in it, they may be able to apply themselves. The other aspect, of course, is for the manager to be really crystal clear with their subordinates about what they're accountable for, to make sure that they do that work. So in summary on this question, on this section then, effective managers need this balance of problem-solving capability, skills and knowledge, and application. So failure to get this right may appear to be a manager failure, but it might just be a question of being poor fit to role. So these things really are role dependent, and they're driven by the level of the role. So bearing in mind, again, the chart I showed you earlier, complexity of work increases as you go up the organization, and a capability to that work as you go up. So I've drawn it in a slightly different way here, where you can see on the left-hand side that as one position is higher in the organization, there is increasing complexity, and there is a way of defining what the differences in that complexity are from level to level in the organization. And then on the right-hand side, this increasing capability of managers with the right skills, with the right knowledge, and that will apply themselves to the work. So that all comes together. So looking at your position then, I've got this little picture. Those of you that did the pre-reading that I sent around the link to will recognize this from the article. It's also posted on the web if you'd like to see it there. So here's you and your team. So let's assume that you're in level 3 work. So you've got subordinate managers working for you. Or you might be in, let's say, financial services, where you're doing level 3 work as a director of financial services, and you've got a group of workers that are reporting to you. So let's stick with this financial services example. So what I see often in that sector is that there's a whole group of individuals reporting, sometimes way more than should be, sometimes 20 or 30 subordinates reporting to the director. Some of those are probably doing level 2 work, which are professional level positions. So they're using their diagnostic capability to solve problems of clients and provide them with suggested solutions. So that's high level sales in terms of suggesting a retirement strategy and an investment strategy and so on. The other type of workers that you may have would be those frontline workers, what I would call level 1 workers, who are selling using procedures to sell more items which are just more straightforward. So it could be sell buy this item or this item or this item, and if the client doesn't want any of these items, then you refer them to that professional 2 worker. So if you, as the director, are managing this team, you will perceive those level 2 workers to be higher performing because you're able to delegate to them using your language. But anytime there's issues with the level 1 workers, you're feeling like you have to really pull yourself down into much more levels of detail to try to provide them support. Where your level 2 workers who have that diagnostic capability will be able to solve problems and get on with the work because they have that capability. Your level 1 workers will be looking for procedures and following those procedures, and when they run out of procedure options, they will be coming to you to ask for the solution. So you could perceive this as a level of not being a good performer, when in fact they are doing the work which they are supposed to be doing very well, but there's a missing manager at level 2. So the solution to that problem that I recommend to clients is that one of those level 2 professionals that you have should in fact also be accountable for the level 1 workers. So you have someone with that level 2 capability who can guide them, who can set context in a way that you as the director are not as easily able to, who would be available to them to solve problems, to coach them, to train them, and so on. So thinking about this in terms of the complexity of work and the capability of work to do this, capability of people to do this work becomes really important. On this slide, the last point I want to make is think about one of those people that's really capable of doing their level 1 work. If they're promoted to become this level 2 professional salesperson, because they've done really good work. They've topped out their quota every quarter in terms of sales at level 1. So they're promoted to level 2. They may not be successful if they don't have that level 2 problem solving capability, because they won't be able to do the diagnosis. So what you'll find is you've taken your best person from that level 1 work, and you've put them in a situation where they're not going to be successful at level 2. So where does that lead us? So I want to give you some tools. I have a sister webinar, the follow-up to this one, where we're going to get into some really hands-on tools that I can recommend to you for doing this. But in this webinar, we're really focusing on laying out what some of the issues are that people tend not to think about. So the first starting point to think about is that to realize that as organizations grow in size and complexity, we need systems to ensure that everyone's aligned and that they're focusing in on the right work. So when you're a small organization, when you're just created, the charisma and the enthusiasm and the energy of the CEO drives the whole organization. Everybody knows what everybody's supposed to do, and they just get on with the work. But as the organization grows, and as you bring in extra levels of management to manage all of this work, we find that the CEO gets further and further removed from the front line. So while being in touch with the front line is important, the CEO cannot manage the front line. And it becomes at some point not possible for the CEO to really understand what is happening at the front line. So the first step is that you really need to be able to understand the current state. And to understand what I'm getting at here, I want to ask you this question. So if you're doing your strategy in your organization, do you look in these areas that have just coming up on the screen now? Of course you do. If you're thinking on a major expansion, you're going to think about your financing, and you're going to know exactly what the implications are. You're going to think about financial reporting and how you're going to manage this increased amount of transactions. You're going to be looking at infrastructure. Do we have to buy? Do we have to lease? You know the pros and cons. You'll do all the analysis. Same for all of these other things. But the question is, what is the state of your managerial workforce? Is your managerial workforce up to the task of guiding their staff, managing their staff, leading their teams, so that overall you're going to be able to accomplish what you need to in your strategy? And the answer is that typically this question is not asked as part of the strategy development. You really think about all of these others in very precise ways, but don't think about what is the state of our managerial workforce, and do we have the bench strength there to actually execute this strategy. So what we've done at Effective Managers is created the Manager Effectiveness Assessment, which is a tool that came out of the research we did with the University of Ottawa so that you can measure the effectiveness of managers throughout your organization. So what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? How clear are we in terms of delegating? How effective are managers in terms of the amount of time they're spending on their value-added work, and these other 6 related measures that we have in place. Those are detailed in the white paper that I offered to you earlier. So coming out of that, then you can have an assessment of the managerial bench strength of your organization, which gives you insight into the opportunities that you have. So what are your strengths that you can build upon, but also insight into the weaknesses in your organization in terms of where do I have real holes in terms of my managerial leadership capability throughout the organization. So the next step then is doing something about it. So if you measure the state of your managerial workforce, you understand some of these principles that I've outlined to you today in terms of why you may be more or less successful in terms of the competence of your teams. For that and to assist organizations, we've developed an approach called the effective point of accountability. So how do you in your organization ensure that at each point of your organization, people are clear about what they're accountable for, and that you're delegating work as low down the organization as necessary for success, but also that you have a framework in place so that as work flows across the organization, people understand their relationship with each other and how to ensure that success in the organization can be assured by people working in a way that is going to help assure the success of their colleagues. I've got a whole webinar on this effective point of accountability, but I also have a white paper on this, again available for sale on my website. But I'm very happy to offer this as well to you. Just send me an email and I'll send you the attachment later today, or in response to your email. So I hope I've given you some things to think about in terms of managerial performance, because I see this all the time. I'm in organizations, I'm talking to my clients, and they're wrestling with performance issues, and they're trying to train their way out of it and coach their way out of it, and they're being frustrated because they're not being successful in that. And the issue is not around competence of the individual. The issue is that people have been misappointed. They're not in the right role. They don't have the capability to work at that level in the organization. And therefore, you can't train your way out of it. You have to figure out strategies for either reassigning that person, shoring that person up, or literally getting that person back into a role where they can be successful. In terms of what specifically can you do when you get in that situation, I wanted to get into that, and I realized I just wouldn't have time in this webinar. So I've already created the next webinar, which is available on December 16th from 11 to 12, 1 hour earlier than this one. I called it the Peter Principle. It's a real thing, and you can register for that on www.bit.ly/EFFMGR Peter. You see this at the top of this screen, or there's a link to that in the last newsletter that I sent out. So feel free to register for that. If you're not able to attend, register anyway, because everyone who registers does get the recording to the video. So I'll be able to catch you up on this. So it'll start off with a summary of what we've covered off today, sort of a recap, and then we'll get into some of the specific strategies that you can use with individuals. I also wanted to point out my book. It's written for the perspective of the CEO, but it would be of interest to any manager of managers in terms of what are the processes that you need to have in place in an organization for an organization to be high performing. You can order it from any of the Amazon sites, or it's available through my website as you head there. I just wanted to point out that there are also a lot of resources that are free on, I talked about 2 paid ones today already, but there are a lot of free resources. Do check out effectivemanagers.com. I've got downloads, and there's just thousands and thousands of words of articles on all of these topics. There's also an overview of the research that we've done. And all of these all of these webinars, I'm sorry, are published on my YouTube channel. So if you wanted to find out more about the effective point of accountability, for instance, you can find out there. If I've just published this one, you could see on the screen here, it's a 17-minute video, an excerpt from a workshop I did with the alumni at the EMBA program at the University of Ottawa. Are leaders and managers different? It's a moot point. And I see I've got a typo here I'll have to fix up. So that does bring me to the end of the webinar. I do have a couple of minutes for questions, and I see there's one question here, but if there's anything that struck you that you would like me to elaborate on, please do type that in while I answer this first question, and I will get back and then I can answer that afterwards. And this question is asking about the survey size and the participants from the research. That's an excellent question. I should just build it into the webinar because it's a question I get almost every time. And that is that what we did is I partnered with Sui Go, who's a professor at the University of Ottawa, and we wanted this to be measuring real things. So it's not students in a laboratory answering questions in an artificial situation. We actually went to managers in organizations, and in every organization that participated, we surveyed every manager in the organization. So we had 8 participating organizations, almost 2,000 manager-subordinate relationships, all sizes of organizations, covered off all sectors. So it was, well, when I say all sizes, a variety of sizes, because we didn't go to any of the really large corporations because we wanted to keep it manageable in terms of numbers and the analysis. So what we've found very interestingly is that there's not a difference in terms of the way, excuse me, there's not a difference in the way managers respond in sectors or in size. So I think we really are getting down to issues of human beings and how we operate, and some of the systems and support that we need in place to be successful in our work. Okay, if there are no other questions, none have come up. Let me just check the chat and make sure that no one put it in the chat and said, nope, we're good there. Okay, so that does bring us to the end of the webinar. We're just a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, so that's great. When we log off, there will be an opportunity to complete a survey. I would be very grateful if you take the 1 or 2 minutes it would take. There's only 3 questions, and if there is a question that you'd like to get back to me, for me to get back to you on individually, just please do. Just put it in one of the comment boxes, and I will get back to you. On page 23, is the 4th point correct? And you're asking Craig about bullet number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Over-escalate and tend not to sidestep issues that should be resolved. And what I mean by this one, so if you have someone that doesn't have the information or problem-solving capability that they require for success in the job, they won't be able to solve the problems at the level that they should. So if they run into an issue where they should be able to make a decision in their level in the organization, and that you would expect them to be able to make that decision, what will happen is that because they don't feel they have the capability, or they in fact don't have the capability to make the decision, they will either try a workaround, they'll sidestep it and kind of ignore it, or they will come back to you as your manager for the solution, because they know intuitively that you have the capability to be able to solve the problem where they don't have the capability to solve the problem. So from your perspective as a manager, the top performers are solving problems, and the not so top performers, because they don't have the problem solving capability to solve the problems, either sidestep them or what you would perceive as over-escalate, because instead of solving them, they keep coming back to you. Okay, so sorry about that, but it gave me a chance to elaborate on that other point as well. So that does bring us to the end. Thank you very much again, everyone. We're just now 2 minutes over, so thank you for sticking with me. I do appreciate your time. Please do fill out the survey, and we will come back to you. Craig, I see you've got a follow-up. I'll send you an email on that one, and we'll resolve it at that time. So thanks very much, all. Take care. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers. Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.